Oh, I love it.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to tonight's public hearing for our election administration plan on Thursday, August 29th, 2019. I want to go over a couple of housekeeping with you. Please note that there are emergency exits this way through the same door that you came in. We have restrooms in the back to my right and that way. And if you need to stand, because there are no scheduled breaks, please feel free to go over to the side. And there will be a question and answer period at the end where you'll be lining up at that podium. So thank you very much, and let me welcome our registrar, Neil Kelly, to the mic.
Good evening. Welcome, everybody. My name, like you said, is Neil Kelly. I'm the Registrar of Voters for Orange County. We're happy that you all came out this evening to hear what we're doing with vote centers here in Orange County, and specifically the election administration plan, which is the guiding document for our full planning of implementing vote centers in 2020. So I have a couple of comments before I actually get started with the presentation. The first is, we don't have vote centers and ballot drop box locations completely identified. So you might ask, what's the purpose of this meeting tonight? I guess that would be one question I would have. The second is that this plan is in draft form, but the public comments have closed. So again, what's the purpose of the meeting tonight? So the first is related to vote centers and ballot drop box locations. The law is very specific. So by the time that the EAP, which is the Election Administration Plan, is published, we need to be able to say, what is the guiding document? How are we going to be implementing this countywide? And what's the process we're going to go through for putting ballot drop boxes in place and vote centers in place? That's really the purpose of that part of the plan. It's very difficult to manage and negotiate locations this far out from an election. You can imagine if you owned a location and we came to you and said, can we use your site for 11 days in March? There's a lot of factors that go into that. So the law has allowed for the finalization of vote center locations on December 6th. So that's the date that we will publish and finalize all the locations throughout Orange County. In addition, it's the same for ballot drop boxes. I'll talk a little bit about ballot drop boxes and what we're doing with installation and how those are going to be placed as a part of the presentation. But again, that needs to be finalized by December 6th, those locations. Before Election Day. So the draft plan itself really has some major components that's important for you if you're interested in this process to understand. The first is staffing, accessibility and language survey tools, how we use those and what we do with them, how we're going to be implementing accessibility throughout the county, as well as language services, vote center layouts. What does the average layout of a vote center look like? How is that different from a polling place? You'll see that in the plan itself. What's our security plan? How are we going to protect your ballot? How are we going to protect your vote going into vote center implementation? That's a big part of the plan itself as well. What about communication? Somebody asked me the other day, what's the worst thing that you think could happen? What's the thing that you lose sleep over every night? That's a great question. I would say one of the big ones is somebody on election day calls me and says, I'm at a garage somewhere and where's my polling place? That's going to be a question we get. And a lot of voters, you know, you guys are here because you're concerned and you're paying attention to this, but the average voter isn't really going to think about it until they get something in the mail or it's election day. So that's a big part of the communication tool. And you'll see in that plan, we're going to saturate Orange County with communication. There are going to be multiple mailings to voters. There's going to be a very intense, robust media plan that we're going to implement throughout the county. That's going to go on for about 60 days prior to election day. And as you'll see, as a part of this presentation, will be a budgeted amount of close to $2 million trying to reach voters and tell them about this change here in the county. And then what are the fiscal impacts? That's a big part of the plan too. How are we paying for this? What's the cost? What's the cost difference between polling places and vote centers? So that's a big part of the plan. There are other things included in the plan. I would encourage you to look at it. It's on our website. ocvote.com/vote center, and you'll find that draft plan is already up and published. We did receive some public comments during the public comment period, very valuable comments, and we're going to make some changes actually to the draft plan, specifically to some of the sections on accessibility, perhaps on language services, and then we'll republish that draft plan. And that's going to take place on September the 6th. There'll be another 14-day public comment period that will activate following September the 6th. My plan is to publish the final document on October the 4th. In the law, there's a requirement to publish that final document by November the 4th. But I want to do that a little earlier so we have some padding, because we're on a short timetable right now. Those of you that have been following this process, you know that the process for getting vote centers approved in Orange County was delayed by about a year. And because of that, we're now really in a very tight time crunch to get this accomplished. But we have a great team, we're working on that diligently. One other comment for you with respect to the election coming up, March the 3rd, I'm sure you all know that date for the primary. There is a November election coming up here in Orange County, November the 5th. There's going to be about 350,000 voters affected in that, 4 jurisdictions. It will not be a vote center election. So we're doing our best to make sure voters are not confused between that November election and the March primary, because the November election will be a polling place election. So I want to go through the plan itself, kind of the highlights of what we're doing and what is a vote center. Some of you may be here and wondering what the heck this is, and also how is it different from how we voted in the past. So I'm sure it's redundant for some of you, but for others, maybe not. The 2 introductory slides there, just keep you entertained. Voters' Choice Act was passed in 2016 by the legislature. In the passage of that act, there were 14 counties that were allowed to go in 2018. By that, it really wasn't a pilot project, because the plan was, after 2018, all counties could access the Voters' Choice Act and participate if they wanted to. We were one of those named in the Voters' Choice Act in 2016. Our board decided to delay this decision, which is understandable, and so we ended up in 2019 having approval from the board. So vote by mail ballots are sent to every registered voter under the Voters' Choice Act. I'm going to kind of walk you through all the pieces related to VCA and what it means for you as a voter and what it means countywide as we walk through the presentation. All right, so here are the 3 basic functions of what the Voters' Choice Act does. First is, as I said, everybody gets a vote by mail ballot in the mail, out of the gate. 29 days away from Election Day, we will mail those ballots, and those voters will receive them, and they can start voting. Because we will have ballot drop boxes located throughout the county, if you voted the day you received your ballot, you could drop it in a drop box, and away you go, you're done. That ballot will be tracked diligently as we go through the process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the boxes themselves. In-person voting doesn't go away. So unlike Washington State or particularly Oregon, where you have all vote by mail ballot elections, there's really not an in-person component, although Washington's changing a little bit to a vote center model. And they're open 11 days, 10 days plus what you think about traditionally as election day. So 11 full days of voting, including Saturdays and Sundays. It gives an opportunity for individuals who might not be able to always make that Tuesday to be able to vote at any time during that 11-day window. One of my favorite things about the move to vote centers is that voters can vote at any location throughout the county. No longer are they tied to that home precinct. When you would get your sample ballot in the mail and it said you had to go to your polling place down the street, and if you didn't, you'd have to cast a provisional ballot if you wanted to do that location. With vote centers, it's wide open. If you live in Laguna Beach and you work in Anaheim, vote in Anaheim. You're going to get your ballot for Laguna Beach in Anaheim. So that's the beauty of this system, is that it really expands the opportunities for voters and makes it much more efficient in terms of running the elections themselves. I talked a little bit about provisional ballots, and I'm guessing most of you know what they are, but if you don't, a provisional ballot simply means that we don't know the eligibility of the voter at the time they cast the ballot. So if you go into a polling place under a traditional election model, the typical reasons you would cast a provisional ballot, I'd say 90% of the reasons, 2 of them. One is you went to the wrong polling place. That's been growing exponentially. And 2, you got a vote by mail ballot, but you didn't bring it with you when you showed up at your polling place. Those are the 2 reasons you'd vote provisionally. You go into another line, you fill out an envelope, it takes you about 10 or 15 minutes extra, then you cast your ballot, and then we have that envelope, and we would review that after the election. The beauty of vote centers is, for the most part, all of that goes away. Because you can vote at any location, you're no longer in the wrong precinct. You're no longer in the wrong polling place. Because we see in real time whether you cast your vote by mail ballot or you received one, you don't need to bring it with you. Because when you vote in person at the vote center, that vote by mail ballot is automatically voted as soon as you vote. So all of that goes away in that process of reviewing all those provisional ballots after that goes away as well. So in-person voting, we've talked about voting at any location. This bottom piece here is pretty important. This is the design right now for the locations that will be open throughout the county. So 38 locations will be open for the full 11 days. Now, there's a lot of good data out of Colorado where vote centers have been in place since 2014, and the data clearly shows that most voters are not voting 11 days out. You know, it kind of starts to be a little bit of a graph climb, and then when you get to that third day before election day, you see the spike because people are starting to pay attention to coming in. That's why for the last 4 days, we expanded to 188 locations throughout the county. That will expand pretty quickly, right at that 4th day out. And there's hours right now that we are planning on for the first 7 days would be 8 to 5. So it'd be normal business hours from 8 to 5. Once you get into the 4-day window, we start expanding those hours. So we're going to move on the 3 days before election day to an 8 to 8 schedule. And then on election day itself, it still has the polling place hours of 7 to 8. So you don't lose that 7 a.m. as well. So during that last 4 days, there's an expanded opportunity for voters to cast a ballot if they are working and they want to be able to vote later in the evening or earlier in the morning. This is a great chart to just kind of show you the differences between a polling place and a vote center. So on the left there, currently under our model, which we'll have in November, you can vote on an electronic voting unit with a paper backup. You can drop off your ballot at any one of the polling places that are open. You have accessible voting. The things that you don't have are on the right there, and this is what will be in vote centers starting in 2020. Ballots on demand. So ballot on demand simply means you walk in any location, and we can print your ballot for your home precinct and hand it to you. Secure electronic check-in. I'm going to go into that a little bit more, but that simply means that if you've been a poll worker for us in the past, first of all, thank you for your service. But you would have been using a paper roster to look for names in the polling place. We'll now have an electronic check-in system that connects our database with that vote center, which means we can look up voters' names, look at their records, find information out if they need help or assistance, and solve problems on the spot. As a poll worker in a garage with a paper roster, you wouldn't have been able to do that. So we'll be able to solve a lot of problems on site with voters. Now again, thanks to the poll workers, we love you. The volunteer process is going away, and we're moving to an employee-based program. I will say this, I was in Colorado several times monitoring vote centers, and some of the best employees that I ran into in vote centers were former poll workers in Colorado, because they hired a lot of those former poll workers. We're going to have a job fair for poll workers in October, and we'll announce that date shortly. So if you worked before the poll worker, we'd love to have you come down and talk to us. So there will be trained employees. You'll be able to vote at any location, multiple days we've talked about, and reduce costs, which I'll get into a little bit further in the presentation. So on the right here is what you're going to see is our ballot drop boxes that will be located throughout the county. There's going to be 110 of these located throughout the county. What's the difference between a mailbox and a ballot drop box? A couple of things. The mailbox goes through, obviously, the postal system. We have this big federal agency between you and us. Postal employees and the postal system is a great partnership with us. We appreciate them. But it can save time by getting it directly to us in the ballot drop box. But more importantly, we hear from voters kind of anecdotally that a lot of them just want that added security of delivering it directly to the election official. So that's when it goes into the ballot drop box. The ballot drop boxes, unlike a mailbox, you can see the bolts are exposed on the mailbox. There's a lot of mailboxes being stolen throughout Southern California. We hear this from postal investigators. They're just ripping up the mailbox and taking that with them. The bolts under these ballot drop boxes are hidden. You can't get that. If you're taking the ballot drop box, you're taking the sidewalk with you when you do it. They're also military grade. By that I mean they're 1/4-inch thick steel. If a car hits this, and I've said this over and over again, the car is destroyed. The box will be pristine. We had a car hit one of our boxes at our location in Santa Ana, and it's proven. Come look at the box, it's perfect. The car was damaged pretty significantly. The boxes will be closed until the 29th day before election day. So once we mail out the ballots, all the boxes will be open. They'll stay open continuously until election night at 8 p.m. And then they will all be closed at one time at 8 p.m. on election night. So if you're in line in a car, for instance, and it's 5 minutes to 8 o'clock, you're going to be able to still deposit your ballot into the drop box. Two locations to be able to drop your ballot into the box. One is really designed for drive-through or drive-up, and on the other side is for walk-up. They're secure, they're accessible, they're locked, conveniently located. By that, what we're trying to do is not place a ballot drop box right on top of a vote center or close to it, because the theory is, if you have a vote center close to your house, you might go do that in person. But if you're out at work and you want something a little bit more convenient between home and work, there might be a ballot drop box location for you. All of these will be on our website. You'll be able to find it by putting in an address or your address, and you'll see the locations around you. When you get your voter guide in the mail, which you think of as your sample ballot, typically, you'll see the closest ballot drop box to you printed on that, as well as the closest vote center to you. But that, again, you don't have to use one of those. You can look up any location. This gives you a good graphic overview of the days leading up to the election. You can see here on the top, 29 days before election days, where we would open the ballot drop boxes and it would start mailing vote-by-mail ballots. Here on the 22nd is when the vote centers will open, and then they will close at 8 p.m. on the 3rd, on what is traditionally election day. I'm not even using really the term election day anymore because it's 11 election days, right? It's 11 days worth of voting instead of a single day. So that gives you an overview of vote centers, what they are, and so I want to walk you through the plan itself. What are kind of the big highlights in the plan? What can you expect to see when you look at the plan online? So this is a little bit about vote-by-mail ballots and ballot printing. We're one of the few counties in California, I think maybe the only one, that is printing all of our own ballots in-house. So why are we doing that? Number one, we maintain control over the process, and we can ensure that we're meeting the deadlines and not getting in line with other printers or other counties that might be sending their materials to a printer. And it's also, in my opinion, more secure because we have those ballots on our site, in our facility in Santa Ana, and we control that process from start to finish. We start with raw paper stock, and we turn them into ballots and then mail packets. The vote-by-mail packets themselves, we redesigned the envelope in 2018. We had a lot of phone calls from people saying, "Where's my ballot? I didn't receive it." And we would describe the envelope, and they said, "Oh yeah, I did get that." Because it was a white envelope for almost 40 years, and it changed in 2018. So we're hoping that this election cycle coming up, that's a little bit more ingrained with voters, and they'll be able to see those. How is the counting process going to change? Well, it's really not, because the vote-by-mail process and the dates stay the same. We can start processing vote-by-mail ballots starting 10 days out from election day, and we'll do that. As we're collecting the ballots from drop boxes, it will be tightly controlled, and you will be able to see as a voter. If you look up your voter record online, you'll be able to see that your ballot was dropped, let's say in box 42, and it was picked up on X date, and it was processed on X date. So that gives assurances to the voters that, hey, I did drop my box in box 42. We'll be tracking it to that level of granularity. And that tracking of vote-by-mail ballots, by the way, is going to be, we're working on a mobile forward piece on our website that's changing a little bit, so it'll be much more friendly, I think, for users to be able to track their ballot and look up their information before the March primary. There's a lot of information up there, but the bottom line is, what's the method that we use to select vote centers? Somebody asked me the other day, how do you decide where a vote center is going to go? Well, one of the ways that we decided where a polling place would go in a regular polling place election is the homeowner there, and are they willing to open the garage? And it sounds simple, but in reality, that's really what it was, because we had to find 1,200 locations countywide, And making homes, for instance, fully accessible is almost impossible to do. With vote centers, we're able to find locations that are fully ADA accessible. But in order to find locations, we had to build a tool to be able to look at this data that's required under the law. And you can see all that up here. I won't read it all to you. But some of the highlights are, what are the traffic patterns around the community? What's the accessibility in certain locations? What's the vehicle ownership, for instance, in certain locations? So all that would go into this tool to be able to give us a grade on the location of the vote center. Does it make sense to have a vote center in this part of the community? And so that helps us in trying to select these locations. Also, 28 previous meetings that we held leading up to this one, which is the 29th, we had feedback from the public that said, hey, I think it would be great to have this vote center at this location in our community. Here's the reason why. And so we would plug that information, that data in, and we now have all that plotted on a map that you can find on our website currently today. If you go to ocvote.com/vote center, you'll be able to see the draft map with the addresses currently online. Not only the vote center locations that are draft form, but also the ballot drop box locations that are in draft form. I will caution you and say that none of those are solidified. Let me take that back. One ballot drop box location was solidified today, for sure. But what you can see there is kind of the spread and where do we have these draft locations throughout the county, and it gives you a good idea of your community and what might be placed in those locations. Some of the things that are not included in this data, but we take into account, let's say, for instance, voter density. What's the density of voters living in a community? Because that's very important. What's the turnout rates, which is a part of this model, but what are the turnout rates in the community? Because that's really important. It's going to inform us. In Colorado, the data has been pretty clear. People have been concerned about everybody getting to vote by mail ballot. I've heard some of those concerns. And Colorado did this and mailed out all vote by mail ballots to voters who have never used a vote by mail ballot before. The rates of return actually dropped because some of those voters then went to the in-person voting, and those who were never getting a ballot before kind of stayed traditionally with the in-person model. So the reality is, I'm hoping we're going to get more vote by mail ballot usage. That's my hope. But we might see a dip in that vote by mail ballot usage like Colorado. So here's, when we go through this assessment matrix, and it's pretty cool when you look online because you're going to see these hexagons, and in those hexagons, they're colored. And that color is a grading. You'll see in the legend, it tells you it's from low to high in terms of the location. Is it best based on all of the data? And in that assessment matrix, zoom in on that because you want to be able to have a close look at those. And when you click on them, you can see the address. If you're too far zoomed out, you can't do that. But that assessment matrix helps us when we're trying to cite locations. Let me tell you the biggest challenge for us right now, and I know it's the same in our counties that are surrounding us that are going to vote centers, and that is, are these locations fully accessible? So right now we're going through ADA assessments on all of these sites that we have in draft form. I have a team of 15 people who are doing that nonstop throughout the day, trying to get these assessments done. I got a question the other day that said, well, what if you're not done by December the 6th? And that's not an option. You have to be done by December the 6th to have these locations done. Election day is not going away. We've updated our accessibility survey to match the requirements under SB 450, which is the vote center bill. And so we have those tools all in place and we're using them daily. Here's the formula for how vote centers are going to be put into the community, the numbers of vote centers and ballot drop boxes. For the 11-day period, you have 1 in every 50,000 voters. Once we get into the 4-day period, it's 1 in every 10,000 voters. How are those numbers selected? Well, when the legislature was working through this, there were a lot of working groups looking at numbers and data, a lot from Colorado based on that data and what that usage was. What this essentially is saying, right now, you have about 1,000 to 2,000 voters going to a polling place, depending on if we consolidated them or not. This essentially says you're going to have 4 to 5 polling places going into a vote center. Typically, you might have more, but that's typically what's going to happen. And we currently have 1.6 million voters. If we were to lock it today, it might look a little different than it's going to on December the 6th, because it's based on the voter registration counts. Our voter registration numbers have been growing pretty quickly. There's a lot of voter registration drives happening right now, so that may change the actual number when we get to December the 6th. We're hoping it doesn't change too much. Here's the recruitment process for vote center facilities. Past polling place research is great because we've used a lot of locations for polling places. This building is a great example of that. Public facilities, city evaluations. Retail centers are great because that's where people are going, right? Foot traffic at retail locations is ideal. The downside is if the economy continues to stay pretty healthy, there's not a lot of empty space in certain retail locations, so it's kind of tough to get that, but we're working on that. And then our online suggestion form, we've got hundreds of online submissions for people that are saying, hey, here's a good address you should look at. We'd love for you to do that, continue to do that, that's online, you can do that today. So here's a typical vote center layout. I want to walk you through what you would see in normal vote centers. When you go into a polling place, the bottleneck is always at the check-in station. Because even though the poll workers are looking as fast as they can at that paper roster, if they couldn't find a name right away, it might delay that process of looking them up. Under our vote center model, we have electronic check-in, like I was talking to you about. And instead of one station for check-in, there's going to be 4 at every vote center. So that removes and reduces that bottleneck at that single location. The bottleneck typically is not at the voting booths, it's typically right where we check in. So 4 right out of the gate. The law, SB 450, requires 3 accessible units per vote center. So voters with disabilities, that they could be able to go in, vote independently at a machine, and to be able to do so without assistance. In our vote centers, you're going to see 5 of those devices instead of 3. So we're making that number higher than what's required in the law. And then we're going to have a paper-centric system, which means that when you go and you get your ballot on demand, if you're not using an accessible device, you'll be handed a paper ballot. And you'll go vote that paper ballot in the booth, and you as a voter will go up and put it into a scanner, which will pull it in just like an ATM does a deposit. If the ballot is ready to go, it will deposit it into a secure box. If there's an overvote or an undervote, it's going to stop you as a voter and ask you about that. You have an opportunity to get that ballot back if you need to be able to spoil it and to cast another one. So 4 of those ballot printers will be at every location as well, because they'll be assigned to every check-in station. So 4 ballot printers, 4 check-in stations, 5 accessible devices at every location. Each average location will also have 2 scanners. So we don't want a line if we've taken care of all those other issues, and then we get a line to scan the process. So 2 scanners at each location. Every night there's going to be a very detailed process for collecting materials from the vote centers. It'll happen nightly. And then we'll reopen again the next morning, go through it again, and shut it down that night, and then go through the collection process again.
Would the collection process move the ballots off-site?
Yes, it does. Yes.
How many
Question
people are
was,
manning it?
let me repeat the question. So the question was, the ballots will be taken off-site every night? Yes, the answer is yes. And then you were asking how many?
How many people manning each vote center?
So we get to that, but about 7. About 7 total for each vote center. Ballot Dropbox formula is a little bit different than vote centers. Instead of 1 in 10,000, it's 1 in 15,000. So again, 110 boxes as of today. That may change by December the 6th. Will be located throughout the county. Putting a ballot Dropbox in is much more difficult than you think because we're taking space of somebody's property, right? So there's a lot of work that has to be done. We have a license packet that we use with the property owners that we go through and negotiate with them. They sign the license agreement, then we can go in and install it. We have 2 contractors that have been hired to work on installing these ballot drop boxes throughout the county. All of our ballot drop boxes are in our warehouse. We're right now going through the process of wrapping them so they'll look like this. Then they will be going out and installed at various locations throughout the county. My goal is to make sure that we have diversity in the locations. Because I want some at retail locations, but I also want some at government facilities, in city halls, et cetera. Because you want to be able to go as best as we can where the voters are. The collection of these is less frequent when we're 29 days out than when you get closer to election day. So there'll be a couple of days where you don't have collection of the ballot drop boxes when you're further out from election day. So we get closer to election day, it becomes daily pickup. So we're really turning into a mini post office and doing these logistics to be able to pick up these ballots. Each ballot drop box will have a number on it, as well as information for the voter. If there's something wrong with the drop box, there's a number for them to call. It's manned all the time so that we can respond to those issues. It's not the most important thing, but this is one of my favorite features of the ballot drop box when you talk not about the security piece. But we have graffiti-free wrap on this, which means if it's graffiti, we can wipe it clean pretty quickly. Our goal is to do that.
Are these designed in some way to keep somebody from putting something in them that would damage the ballots that are already inside?
Right, so the slot itself, unlike a mailbox, will only allow about 2 ballots to be able to go in at a single time. So it prevents somebody from putting, let's say, large amounts of liquid inside of the ballot drop box. We're thinking about doing some testing on fire suppression inside of the ballot drop box. Washington State has done some of that. Mixed results on that working, but we want to do some testing on that. Also, the ballots themselves are up from the floor of the ballot drop box, which means that if water does get into it, the water falls off from the collection unit itself.
So they're like on a grid or something that keeps them up?
Precisely, exactly. The ballot, it doesn't just go into the metal box. So inside of this is a collection device that has slides that takes the ballots directly to the collection box. And the box itself is set aside from the outside of the box. So if someone were to drop something in like you described, it's more likely that it's going to fall in between the collection device and the metal frame itself. So pretty secure. We want to do that testing on the fire suppression piece. As I mentioned before, we are hiring 7 individuals on average per vote center location. One of the big pieces of this is language assistance in vote centers. And I'll talk to you about how we're going to be doing that a little bit further down the road. But that's a big part of, individuals that are bilingual in the 4 languages we support: Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Spanish. We could certainly use the help as we're getting closer to this. Projected total need of our employees is 2,000. On average, we've recruited in a presidential election between 8,000 and 10,000 poll workers for one election. But that's for one day. Imagine we're trying to recruit people 3 weeks for a 3-week period. It makes it much more difficult. They read my mind. On our website, ocvote.com/vote center, there's a location that you can use to be able to show an interest if you're interested in working in a vote center. And it's also at ocvote.com/jobs. So if you are interested, we'd love to hear from you. There is enhanced training. One of the things that I want to make sure is in our training, and we're working on that right now as I speak, is customer service. Because if the vote center employees know the procedures and the laws, that's very important. That's going to be a big part of that training. But what about how people are treated when you walk into a voting location? That's going to be half of our training that we're going to be going through. We're going to be working on a 1-week training program for our employees to compare. Our poll workers went to a 3-hour training program. This will be about a 1-week immersion training program for our vote center employees. Okay, so let's talk about the bilingual services for our vote centers. Now, the law is very specific. If there are precincts that are touching where a vote center would be located in a precinct that have language requirements, there's a requirement to have an in-person bilingual language component inside of that vote center. So it becomes very difficult for us right now because the voter registrations keep coming in. We don't know what all the language requirements are going to be until we get closer to the election. But we're doing our best right now to do that analysis. So we have a good idea of the locations in the county where we would need that language support. If it doesn't, now here's the challenge of the vote center. So if you were to go into a polling place in Anaheim and you needed assistance in Spanish, let's say, we know that data in Anaheim. You can put an individual in that polling place in Anaheim that speaks that bilingual language. But let's say you live in Anaheim and you're having fun on a Saturday in Laguna Beach, and you need language support in Chinese. Well, normally there wouldn't be that language support perhaps in a polling place in Laguna Beach. So how do we handle that? If it doesn't meet the criteria where we would have in-person language support, we're putting in a video conferencing system. So a voter can go into a booth privately, independently, and have a face-to-face with our staff in our office, directly on the video screen. If they feel uncomfortable doing that on the video screen, we'll have a telephone component as well. So we're not forcing them to use the video screen if they don't want to. So every site will have language support throughout. As I said, we're going through that analysis right now to find out the exact locations in the county currently where we might have to have that support. Our language assistance services is very robust. I'm proud to say that the U.S. Department of Justice has mentioned many times that look to Orange County for best practices on language support. I'm proud of our team. We do a great job in that. One of the things that we've done since 2007 is gone 20% above what the requirements are in federal law to make sure that we have that extra padding. So these folks work on bilingual staffing. They do all of the translation reviews for all of our ballot materials. The ballots all the way to the voter guides, to the website itself. The video conferencing piece I talked about will be a big part of this team as well. For servicing voters with disabilities, the components that, and I have to be careful about how I'm talking about this because our contract is going to be before our board of supervisors on September the 10th. So we haven't finalized absolutely the equipment that we're getting, but we're pretty close. But the way that this equipment will likely work is that there will be a device that a voter with disabilities can access, can adjust the screen size and the font and change that screen the way it looks, unlike what we currently use today. They'll be able to vote privately and independently on that device. There will be all the assistance tools they would need as a disabled voter to be able to vote and cast that ballot. Once they've cast that ballot on screen, it will print out that paper ballot just like voters would get at the ballot printing station. They would be able to then deposit it into the scanner and it would go into that secure box. We currently have a process in place for requesting vote-by-mail ballots or replacement ballots, but one of the tools we will be adding is a remote vote-by-mail access system for voters with disabilities. So if they can't make it to a vote center, they'll be able to use this remote vote-by-mail tool to be able to mark their ballot online, print it out at home, and then send it back to us. So there will be a tool for that as well. One of the things that I'm very proud of is our partnerships with disabled advocacy groups throughout California. We print their telephone numbers in our voter guide for voters with disabilities. If they need assistance, they can call that hotline or they can call us as well to be able to utilize those services. So a lot of information and support for voters with disabilities as we move into vote centers. We've talked about, instead of the minimum of 3, we're going to have 5. We've talked about the check-in process. Chairs, magnifiers, all will be a part of features for accessibility. Screen reading, magnification on the new devices, inverted colors for those with visual disabilities. Lots of new features that we don't have currently in our system right now that will be available for voters with disabilities. So our electronic poll books and the check-in process does a couple of things. One is it vastly improves security. So how does it do that? Well, voters that might come in and vote in Laguna Beach, and let's say they were a bad actor and they wanted to go test the system and try and cast a ballot again in Anaheim. As they leave the Laguna Beach location, their data has already been uploaded. So when they drive into Anaheim and we look them up on the electronic device, we can see that they've cast a ballot in Laguna Beach. As more counties go online with vote centers throughout California, those counties will be interconnected. So for instance, if San Diego County goes 2 years down the road and someone were to vote in San Diego County, then come to Orange County on the same day, we're going to see exactly what they did in San Diego County. And we're going to see that in the vote center, which you never see in the garage with a paper roster. So big difference there. People have asked, well, what about the security on the devices themselves? The information that's residing on these devices are encrypted. If somebody were to get the information or the data, it doesn't contain personal information that they would be able to get on a voter. And we can wipe them remotely if we needed to. And there's an air gap between these devices and the voting system itself. Completely air gap. If you are interested in more security, Mike Garab right here will be around after the meeting. He can talk to you. He loves to talk this stuff. And we're doing a lot more with mobile device security than you could possibly imagine to keep them secure. The other piece of this is it speeds up the process, which we talked about a little bit earlier, but it truly does because as the employees are looking up this information, it's coming up in real time. They can type in a part of the name and the name will pop up. No longer they have to thumb through these paper rosters to be able to find it.
Question,
Yes.
how do you verify that the person is a valid voter to begin with if you enter their name into that pad?
So the question was, how can we verify that the voter is a valid voter as we're entering that information before we? Same process, you would walk in as a polling place and you would announce your name and you'd say who you are, we would look you up. The information that we have in the voter registration tool and these electronic checking boxes tells us if the voter is an active registered voter. If they're an active registered voter, they have met all the criteria under California law to be able to cast a ballot as an active voter, right? So when you sign under penalty of perjury, you are confirming that you meet all of those requirements. There's not a requirement for looking at identification in California. In fact, it's against state and federal law for us to do that. So we're not comparing an ID to that electronic record. But let's say we see an anomaly. For instance, the voter's not able to tell us what address they're located at. There might be some other information that causes the employee to question this. We've got a lot more at our fingertips in that electronic system than we ever had on the paper roster, so we can investigate further.
So you could reject them then?
We could. I mean, if there was an issue that came up, the employee could deal with that through the manager.
So,
You could do a provisional, but there's circumstances that might come up where somebody questions the eligibility of a voter. I don't want to go into those details, but I can tell you that we could look into that data on that electronic system if we have to.
so we have a lot of duplicate voters still on the voter rolls. We know that. They have two different, the same person has registered twice with just a different number on their birth date or something. Is that recognizable in this?
So you would see duplicate voters, yes. Now the question was about duplicate voters on the registration rolls. I will tell you this, that there's a very good report that just came out from Caltech. Caltech did a 12-month audit on our offices. And if you go look at that data, there's not as many duplicate voters as some people think on the voter rolls in Orange County. But I will address it. When you do have a duplicate voter, you're going to see that information in the electronic check. So go look at that data.
Will the signature be verifiable since those are stored electronically at the ROA?
So there's prohibition in state law of checking the signature at the in-person process. So there's no comparison of the signature on that process currently under state law. Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's talk about a person who went to a vote center as a quote imposter. They tried to vote on John Smith's name, and for some reason he had all the information it took. And then the real John Smith submits a vote by mail ballot.
Yes.
What happens in that case?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So in that case, you would have a situation where that voter would cast a provisional ballot, and that would go ahead.
I said vote by mail, actually physically sticking it into a drop box or a mailbox, but the computer says, oh, John Smith has already voted at a vote center.
First vote in is the one that's counted. The first vote in. That's the way it currently works today in polling places. That's the way it's going to work in vote centers. That doesn't change. What I will tell you is if we see those kinds of anomalies where we have two ballots cast, that individual voter goes to a team in my office that handles two votes that have been cast. That currently happens today with other vote centers. So we'll continue that. That also goes to the district attorney if we have a situation like that. What happens, and I'm going to raise a question for you. So, because I usually get the questions. What happens if a voter comes in and they say, my name is John Smith and I'm here to vote, and the system shows that they've already voted? That's kind of where I was going with that one, right? We do have that fail-safe provision. That's one of those instances that I talked about earlier where most provisional ballots go away. That's a fail-safe for that voter to cast a provisional ballot, to still cast a ballot. And then we look at that data after the fact. We can perhaps go to security footage. We can start looking at investigating with the district attorney's office and figure out what happened and why did we show that individual already casting a ballot. So we're going to continue to do that. It's a good segue into vote center security. We've talked about electronic security. Very different control chain of custody than in a polling place environment. Currently under polling places, our poll workers gather all the information at the end of the night. 2 of them drive to a collection center. They turn over the materials to a collection center employee. There have been many times, I'm sure, you've been sleeping at 3 a.m. on election night that I've been out, not physically, but with our teams in garages looking for ballots to move forward. Because they may have forgotten that they left the ballots in a certain location. It happens. These are folks who are volunteers, and that happens. Under this scenario, though, our employees are trained every night to go to a collection center and turn over the materials, and it's physically checked in. So we know as that data is coming in when it's arrived, if it's arrived. We're also going to be using RFID, which means that we could track this equipment coming in nightly and has it arrived at our facility. We're going to know that through a strict chain of custody process. The enhanced security measures, can't talk about all of them, but we'll continue to work with the Sheriff's Department through this process. We currently work with the FBI and Homeland Security on our election security. We'll continue to do that partner with them as well. If you haven't seen it, I would encourage you on our website. We have an election security playbook. This election security playbook details all of the things that we've done with our systems leading up to the 2018 election, and we'll continue to do that for the 2020 election. It falls into 3 buckets. The 3 main buckets are first physical. What's the physical security of the locations that we're using? What's the chain of custody process? That's number 1. Number 2 is the cybersecurity. What are the defenses that we have in place on our networks to protect against the threat to our systems and the casting of ballots and the posting of voting results? And then finally, the one that scares me the most is the social aspect. If somebody, one of our employees, clicks on a link they shouldn't have, and they open a vulnerability, those are the ongoing training that we do with our employees and the process to protect the system at large. On the cybersecurity piece, if you get a chance, read through this, because we've done a tremendous amount of work here in Orange County to protect the network against vulnerabilities that we know exist currently in today's environment. And that's very important. What's really important is that the official results, and this is the one thing that I have said from day one in changing our voting system, is to have a human readable paper ballot. Because if something were to happen, no system is 100% dependable. Nothing is. We can go back to the paper ballot that's human readable and reconstruct the election to be able to determine the correct vote. So despite all the defenses, we're having that additional backup in terms of what we're doing with our voting system as well. This kind of lays out all the things in that security playbook that we talked about. The one that I want to point out there is the state, federal, and local partnerships. We currently work with the FBI and Homeland Security on a regular basis. I will tell you as we get closer to the election, it's a weekly basis that we're working with these federal agencies. We're working very closely with California Department of Justice as a part of this as well. The National Guard plays a role in this in addition. And then we are working very closely with our local fusion center here in Orange County, which is a consortium of law enforcement agencies here in Orange County. We have these weekly meetings. We have these weekly meetings that we do with Orange County Fusion Center as well. So our security is robust leading into the 2020 election, just as it was in the 2018 election. Another one of my favorite categories to talk about is the costs. What's the cost of operating vote centers here in Orange County? What's the fiscal impact on your tax dollars? Because I know that this is going to be important for the community. If we were going to be replacing our voting system for polling places, we would have done so for about 1,200 locations throughout the county. The cost of the equipment alone would have been about $38 to $40 million throughout the county. Replacing our system in a vote center model, the contract I'm taking to our board on September the 10th, is a $15 million contract for the equipment. So significant cost reduction on the capital side for the equipment. The operating costs over time go down, and we have an average savings of about $200,000 per countywide election as we get further out from the launch. So the launch year is the most expensive. Because we're doing lots of mailings to voters, there's other things that we have to pay for that we would not be paying for in the years out. So the initial launch, the operating cost is slightly higher, then we start to go down in the years following. So significant savings overall for taxpayers throughout the county on both the operational side as well as the capital side.
Neil?
Yes.
So But, and especially because in this next year, you have the two different systems still going on.
Right, so the question is about the two different systems we have going on. So for November, we will be using our older system for the November election. We will not be using any of the new equipment. In March, the plan is to use only the new equipment.
And a reason being?
For November, you're asking? There's no way to get that system up and running right now.
Well, you have the primary, what's the difference?
No, he's talking this November,
Yeah, this November.
The system won't be available.
Oh,
not the November 2020.
I'm sorry.
A little help from the audience is great. Yes, no, it's a good question though. That's okay, so it's for this coming event. The voter education outreach plan, this is one of the biggest meatier components to that plan itself because of the need to make sure that we're educating voters on the change. If you're in advertising, you know you need to hit voters, well, you need to hit consumers 8 to 10 times before they start to make a change in what they're doing. Change is going to be the biggest part of all of this. We need to make sure we're educating correctly. Some of the things that we've done in our community engagement plan have started before this public hearing, where we've been out on the road, talking to communities, talking to groups throughout Orange County and telling them about this change. So that starts to spread. Vote Center workshops have been those public meetings where people can come and provide their input on this process. In 2018, we had about 130 events that we attended throughout Orange County, educating and touching voters throughout the county. We're going to be increasing that for 2020 to 150 total. Partnerships with college, universities, and high schools will continue. Our goal is to have 2 to 4 direct voter contacts overall. Currently today, if you follow us on social media, we're in the process of filming a series of videos that will be used throughout this social media campaign. And those will be concluded at the end of the week. We will launch this campaign end of December, 1st of January. My goal is that when you walk out of your door in Orange County, you can't escape us for a couple of weeks because we're going to be saturating the market with information on the vote center changes, as well as what does this mean for voters and the impacts for the election itself. So a significant increase in our communication overall leading into the March election. That doesn't go away, by the way. So over the summer, we repeat this for the November election, leading into the presidential election in November. We've done a great deal with our public community support. We have what's called the Community Election Working Group, which is our 25-member advisory board that advises us on election issues. I see several of them here in the audience, and thank you for being here. There's 2 subcommittees that are a part of that. One is the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and the second is the Language Advisory Committee. And both of those committees focus in specifically on voters with disabilities and language support throughout Orange County. Those committees have been instrumental in us being able to develop programs leading into the 2020 election. And it's great because these individuals that are a part of these committees and a part of these working groups come directly from the communities and from advisory groups and from advocacy groups throughout Orange County. These are some of the organizations that are supporting our move to vote centers. And we thank all of them that are a part of this. I'm proud to say that both major parties are supporting the switch to vote centers now, which is terrific here in Orange County, and we're proud of that partnership with them as well.
One more back, Neil.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You can see some of the community partners that we have throughout the county. Just I want to point out our launch meetings that we've had of the switch to vote centers. We've had several of them throughout Orange County. We focused one of them just on the community at large for the launch. Then we focused one on city clerks because city clerks are our election partners in the cities. And then we're going to be hosting one in October for elected officials. So elected officials throughout the county will be invited to attend this launch meeting and be able to ask questions and understand how this is going to affect them in candidate filing. That's a big question. What's going to happen when I'm campaigning? How does that change? So there'll be a lot of information for them. One of the things that I do want to tell you, if you work on campaigns, you may have gone up to a polling place before and you've looked at that street index that's on the door and seen who voted. It's been crossed off in different colors by the poll workers. That's all going to digital information for campaigns. So in real time, campaigns will be able to access this data. So for instance, as you come into a vote center and you vote, that data will be sent to campaigns that sign up for this, and it will remove you as having voted. Now, some people say that, it sounds kind of Big Brother-ish. That's all baked into state law. So that's currently allowed. But it'll make it a lot more efficient and easier for campaigns to be able to use that data.
Can I ask for a clarification on that? Earlier meetings have been presented that people would be able to go online and access the data. So now you're vetting in advance and pushing out to the pre-approved people?
Yeah, so the goal is that we will, and it's not completely built yet, but my goal is to make sure that we have a system that's in place that can push it out. So if campaigns sign up for that, and they qualify under state law to be able to receive that information, then that would be pushed out directly to the campaign.
So question. So are you saying that, say, the Democratic Party of Orange County or Republican, they could see how many people have voted thus far up to the close of election?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, and that currently happens now. They just have to do it manually. Or they have to wait 24 hours to get the data from us. So instead of waiting 24 hours, they get it in real time.
What's the justification for, it sounds like that would be a proprietary information.
Right, so under state law, if the campaigns have access to that data so that they can target individuals to try and get them out to vote. It might, and you're not the only one that I've seen that doesn't really like that as an idea of the law, but it's baked into state law. Yes.
I was just going to observe that one thing that does is it means you stop getting calls from your party. Urging you to go out and vote.
In theory, they'll leave you alone. Yes, sir. Real time meaning it could be 10 to 15 minutes when that data is up. Yes, as close to real time as we can get. Yep.
So does Antifa have that information?
Who?
Antifa?
Well, I will say this, if any organization qualifies under state law to receive the data, they could get that data. Working on a partnership currently with 211. 211 is the information system in Orange County that if you dial that, you can get information on any government service. And working on a partnership with them to be able to have vote center information for voters. And then we're also exploring a partnership with OCTA that would utilize Yellow Cab service here in Orange County to be able to pick up voters and take them to a vote center location if they don't have access. We have been having some preliminary discussions internally about that same kind of a partnership with Uber and Lyft. But this partnership already exists with OCTA and Yellow Cab, so we're exploring that currently. Vote center marketing packages are being produced. So for instance, city clerks that want this information and be able to use that in their cities will have a toolkit that they can use for all this information. Starting pretty soon, we're working on that right now. We've kind of covered most of this. If you haven't signed up for our newsletters, I would encourage you to do so on our website. You go to ocvote.com, there's a little box that pops up, and you pop your email address in, and you'll get our newsletters. They go out weekly. We're doing a lot of social media engagement. I will tell you that, you know, we have about 10,000 people that we can engage with on social media at any given time. You know, there are cats on Instagram. They have a heck of a lot more users. But the reason I bring that up is because we want you to spread the word about the changes on those. We need your help as well. We're very proud. We're the first in California to use a system like this to be able to go where the voters are. So this mobile system will still be used in 2020. And it's a pop-up vote center. So we can go to a location that might have a lot of foot traffic on the weekend, and we can stand up a full vote center, fully implement a vote center in any location in Orange County. If your organization has ideas about where this should go in 2020, we'd love to hear from you. We certainly don't partner with political organizations to take this around the county, but I will tell you that we are interested in feedback on where this should go. Very popular at retail shopping centers, college campuses, etc. The beauty of this is it's an open environment. It looks like a little retail store, and we'll be able to go into this mobile pop-up location and access the exact same services that you would in any vote center in Orange County. And we'll be utilizing this pretty heavily in 2020.
How many do you have?
We have one.
Oh,
Oh, no. They're expensive.
I did.
Yes.
I just want to comment that I voted at the pop-up center myself, and it was fantastic customer service. Parking, the employees were amazing.
That's great.
And the open way that it's set up was just terrific.
Good to hear. Thank you, Karen. And fully accessible, by the way, as well. We have a ramp that attaches to this unit for those with disabilities. I told you at the very beginning, close to $2 million is what we're budgeting for our media campaign. I have an RFP that's out on the street right now for a media strategy company that we'll be partnering with. These dollars are grant dollars from the state of California. They're still your tax dollars, but they're not your local tax dollars. So we're partnering with the state on this outreach campaign. By the way, in this media market, $2 million doesn't go a heck of a long way, but it's a lot more than we've spent leading up to any election before. There are several appendices that are attached to the vote center plan itself, the election administration plan. These are located, you can see them on screen there. I won't read through them, but they're a part of that package as well. And lots of information at ocvote.com/vote center. That website continues to grow daily as we add more information into this process. You'll be able to access that online, and then all of our social media handles as well. So we've had lots of good questions already. I'm sure you have a lot more. We'd love to capture you though on video and on audio. So if you wouldn't mind, you could go to the podium and ask your question, and we'll stay here as long as you have questions. And thank you, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Karen Lawson. I live in North Olinda, and I went through the proposed map of locations in North Orange County. I think the plan is just excellent, and I'm so proud of our registrar staff and team. We're so fortunate that we have the commitment to service, community service, and to really mobilizing the vote. So thank you. I'm very concerned that in North Orange County, the communities that tend to be intimidated by public buildings will not be well served by the preponderance of vote center locations being at community centers and public spaces. I do see that there are a number in North Orange County of the 4-day vote centers that are located, or at least proposed to be located in some of the more frequented community centers away from the public sites, which should be good. I'm just concerned, I guess at this point, is input helpful when it comes to speculation, I guess, around how some of our low propensity voting communities may be intimidated by the proposed locations. And then as a follow-up to that, in the past election, I was working really hard to try to get some of the city clerks and public information officers to use their ability to reach out to the community to extend that budget that you just talked about, and the clerks and public information officers were not interested in doing that. I know I've raised this question with you before, so thank you.
Thank you for both of the questions. So I'll take the first one first, and that is the locations currently, as they are in the draft form, are just that. They're draft, and the low-hanging fruit were the government buildings, those community centers. Those were the easiest ones to target because we work with them currently as polling places, and it's easier to make those connections. I've been pushing our team, and I'll continue to do that, to move beyond that. Because what we need to do is to get to those locations, away from government facilities and community centers, and get into spaces that we would never have been in before in a polling place, right? Go where the people are, go where voters are living, and not just rely on those government centers. So it's a little difficult to get that draft plan published and online, which I wanted to do before this meeting, because it's just that, it's draft. You're going to see that change. The difficulty, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is a lot of those locations that might be more ideal than some of those government facilities only want to talk about a 4-day window because they don't want to give up space for 11 days. So it becomes more of a challenge during that 11-day period. But we'll continue to work on that. You have my commitment. You'll see some changes as we move down the road. But just, bear with us as we move forward. If I can add one thing, you didn't ask this, but I've been asked, are the vote centers going to change locations from election to election? Yes, some of them will. Because some landlords may not want us there in the fall. I mean, they may have other plans. So it may have to change, but we're going to do our best not to change them as much. City clerks, they have a big vested interest in this transition to vote centers. There's a new voting system coming. There's going to be changes in election costs for them. And there's a different heightened awareness for them than there was in 2018. So I can't make any promises on behalf of the city clerks, but I have talked to many of them and they're committed to this transition. I think you will see a change in some of that throughout the county.
This was a lot of work y'all have gone to. 100 pages I printed out. Wow. Very detailed information. However, on your video security issue, will it, if possible, it'll be at all drop boxes? That's one question. And you mentioned that the ballots will not be picked up every day. I'm concerned about the security of not picking them up every day. And then the other part of that is the chain of custody. Will there be 2 people picking up the ballots from each drop box? And
Should write down your question.
yeah, I know. Well, I added to it. Okay. That's pretty much what I wanted to ask about the drop boxes.
Gotcha. So the question on the first one was video surveillance. Regulations for ballot drop boxes call for having them in a location where they're under video surveillance when possible. Most of the locations we're looking at currently have some sort of video surveillance, but not all of them. I'm going to be honest with you. There's going to be some that we may place that may not be under video surveillance just because of the location in the county. We may not be able to meet all those requirements. The majority definitely will be under some sort of video surveillance. That's my goal to try and make that happen. We want to continue to test with some video inside of a box itself, like I talked about the fire suppression earlier. That's a big challenge though, and how that data is stored and how you capture it. And there's some privacy concerns that have to go through legal review for that to happen. So that's the first question. Second one, I've already forgotten. Thank you. Chain of custody. Yes, so the chain of custody on the ballot drop boxes themselves, 2 individuals will be picking them up at every location. The amount of time that the ballots are picked up is baked into state law. So that is already set in state law.
Yeah, I understand.
There's a period though, where in the early part of, once we mail ballots and the first and second and third pickup, you could have a 5-6 day window where you have no pickups. We're not going to do that. We're actually going to be including the weekends in that. So it's going to shorten the window than what's in the law itself. It's a legitimate concern on the security. We're going to have to monitor it closely. But as we get closer and that ballot volume continues to grow, you'll have daily pickups as we get closer to election.
And to clarify about the videos again, they will be in place by the area where you place them. In other words, there'll be no live coverage of them. It will all be where you can go back and check.
That's correct.
Should there be a question.
That's correct.
Okay. I'll get mine again.
Hi, Neil. I have several questions, and I think most of them are just clarification based on the EAP and things that I thought maybe just weren't, that were supposed to be there, but then just weren't. The first clarification question is, you're going to be purchasing or installing 564 accessible ballot marking devices. There's 188 vote centers. That's 3 per vote center instead of 5. as you said.
I hope that's in the public comments, because that needs to be changed. It's great we're having this conversation, because that's wrong.
Right, I assumed it was just not updated and it wasn't just,
Yeah, you're correct, you're correct in the assumption.
something else relates to remote accessible vote by mail. In the EAP, the only signifier that I could tell was that a voter with a disability would be able to request the remote accessible vote by mail via the prepaid postage, postcard in the voter information guide. Is that,
So that's one of the options. There should be clarification in there about the remote vote accessible, vote by mail accessible system as being the second option.
so within the section of voters with disabilities on how they can request a vote by mail ballot, there is the list of phone, in-person, email, blah, 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 but there is not that same list when it comes to remote accessible vote by mail. It looks almost like there's one way to get a remote accessible vote by mail ballot and then just a regular vote by mail ballot. So I just wanted to make sure that that's not the only way that somebody who can request remote accessible vote by mail.
Great comments, and we're taking notes right now. So that'll be clarified in the amended draft plan as posted.
I will submit my other comments because I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great comments. Appreciate it.
Before the next question, we do have another question on the other side of the room that we want to take.
Good evening, Neil. Let's get back to drop boxes. These big, large metal boxes with bolts in the ground, will they be basically permanent locations where they're covered up or locked up between the March and November? Or will they all be removed off-site and then returned?
Good question, sir. No, they will be permanent locations. The agreement that we enter into with the property owner is a 5-year agreement. So when I say permanent, 5 years, we hope they renew after the end of that 5 years. They will be locked between the March primary and the November election. Yes.
Hi, Neil. Thank you so much for all of the information. One of the questions that we had, and I think we actually raised this at one of the Q meetings when you had mentioned about the video conferencing services, is just to make sure that ASL interpreters are being provided as one of the options that voters have when they come to the vote centers.
Yes, sir.
And then also, we had really appreciated the fact that when you did the consultation meetings, that you had 2 separate meetings for the disability community. So we would just encourage you to have that as sort of the running model for folks, because they may not be able to get to the one singular meeting. So it's just helpful to have that option as well. And then also had, when it comes to, you mentioned the informational videos, just making sure that they cover a range of topics. One of the biggest things that I think is really helpful for people to know about is the remote accessible vote by mail option, because in different counties that I've spoken to people about it, not a lot of people are aware of what it even is.
Right.
And so, and especially for voters with disabilities, it's really important for them to have that information and to be aware that that is an option that they can use.
That's a really good comment. And one of the challenges for us on the video is balancing the production timing versus when we actually acquire the equipment or when we have the RFP complete. So that's something we're going to have to follow up with on the back end.
Okay. And also, I mean, you mentioned that the voting system approval is coming up in the next couple of weeks, but once that gets solidified, it's also going to be really helpful because it's going to be a new voting system that especially voters with disabilities in Orange County have never used before. It's going to be really helpful for them to get sort of a tutorial on not just how to use it, but also what accessibility features are included in the new system.
So we're going to be working with our Q subcommittees to be able to help us with that. And our plan is to have workshops and extensive outreach where we're taking the equipment out into the community and to be able to allow individuals to access it. Great. So you're hopefully will be instrumental in a big part of that.
For sure, yeah, we would be more than happy to help in whatever ways we can. Great. Thank you.
Roxanne, I think you have one.
Thank you. Two quick questions. Number one, based on your experiences in observing Colorado and also your pilot program, first question, what do you believe has been their biggest challenge and which may also be yours? The second thing is, having worked at Edison in the process and IT group, we have a very large quality management group, independent of the group that actually developed the systems and processes. You have such a group that will address that kind of thing, compliance and internally developed systems and so on. So two questions there.
Yeah, great, thank you. So currently we have a compliance group that is already baked into our operations. That compliance group meets on a regular basis and does exactly what you just described. So that's currently in the operation itself. Tell me your first question again, sir.
Based on Colorado,
Yes,
and your own pilot, which is a great way to go, what have you decided are their biggest problems and extrapolating that may be your biggest problems in rolling this vast system out into the public?
So I think they're going to be very similar. So when we've done our pilots from 2016 and 2018, we learned a lot on the daily pickup and the daily logistics of getting that equipment back, shut down, and that piece. That was probably the biggest challenge in those two pilots. And we learned a lot from that. We made a lot of changes as we're going into 2020. That's going to help tremendously. Colorado, biggest thing I hear from my colleagues in Colorado has been the formulas. Getting the data right on the amount of vote centers that should be in place in the community versus the amount of turnout versus those that are using vote by mail versus in person. That's been the biggest challenge. There's been some changes in Colorado law just in the last few weeks that have made some changes to those formulas. So lots of good data. I will say one other thing about Colorado. There's a lot of good information on the partisan, lack of partisan effect in Colorado, that if you go back and you look when Colorado was making the transition prior to 2014, there was a lot of debate and discussion, the same that I'm hearing in Orange County. You know, what's going to be the effect on these vote centers to the turnout? What's going to be the effect on partisan turnout, et cetera? And in Colorado, they didn't see much of a change at all between pre-vote centers and post-vote centers. The turnout increase they've got in Colorado has been less than 2% statewide. So there hasn't been a lot of changes. I mean, people adapted pretty quickly. They're seeing a lot more in-person drop-off of ballots versus in-person voting. And they thought they received the reverse. So, thank you.
Okay, I had a question. I was a little bit confused on page 3 of your draft. It talks about your wonderful way of your equipment taking care of loading the envelopes that are going out, the ballots that are going out, and it mentions that it could put the voter information on both the outgoing and the return envelopes for the voter. Does the voter still know that they have to sign their mail-in ballot on the envelope on the outside?
Yes, so that information that you're talking about is the electronic data that's taken from the voter record and sprayed onto the envelope itself. The pre-printed information on signing it is very clear in red boxes. We saw a reduction in the number of individuals that did not sign their ballot in 2018, although it's still unfortunately in the thousands of individuals that didn't sign their ballot. But there is some protection in the law now that requires us to contact those voters and to make a change to them, so, or to allow them to update that. But yes, it's emblazoned on the envelope in red.
With the drop boxes again, the election code says that if you're turning in more than your one vote by mail, that you're supposed to sign, the person carrying them in is supposed to sign it.
Right.
Well, obviously at drop boxes, this isn't going to happen because you can't tell who is doing that. But when they walk them into the vote centers, will they be asked to sign all those envelopes and they will be checked?
Yeah, so two things to that. If you go a little bit further down the law you're describing, it says you should do that, but if you don't, the election official cannot disenfranchise the voter by rejecting the ballot. So what we saw in 2018 was about less than 30% of them were signed when somebody actually picked it up. The question on in vote centers, the answer is absolutely yes. Our employees will be trained to look for that when somebody drops off a ballot and to ask that individual to correct it if it's not already signed.
And at the vote centers and the pop-up, the person delivering the ballots will not put them in themselves. They'll be handed to an employee.
Correct, or the individuals could go up to a box drop and pop them in themselves. If they go inside the location, they'll be handed to an employee. But just keep in mind, the drop boxes, they could go deliver it themselves. And on the pop-up, there's actually a drop box that they could go and do that as well.
It's on the outside of the, so they're not required to sign those when they put them in themselves.
The law is a little frustrating for me because there's a requirement and then at the end it says there's not a requirement. So there's really nothing we can do to fully enforce that if they go do it independently and they drop it off. I will tell you that that pop-up unit that we have has security cameras all around it. So we do have that camera coverage on that unit.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So it's a confidential.
Hi, thanks for this opportunity. I have two questions. They're somewhat detailed, but I think it's, I'm asking them because those details are what ends up happening, getting propagated in social media sometimes. One is for the telephone support for those voters who may need either language support or other disability assistance. It says it's toll-free. Does that mean that they will be using their own phones, or will you be providing a phone line?
So we will be providing a telephone for them to access, but if they want to go to the parking lot and use the phone, it's toll-free.
Okay. Now, as long as they feel that
Yes,
they're not being tracked or something.
absolutely.
Feeling like that. The other is about, and you've made it clear that as the timing of the drop boxes, of being able to access the drop boxes as it gets closer and closer to the election, there will be more frequent pickups. Someone who's excited about the online tracking might be also that person that puts it in first day it's available. And then they may not see anything for 5 days. And then they get on social media and say it's all a problem. So how will that, when they get on the online tracking, will it say, hey, guess what? Or how will that be managed?
I'm smiling because we were just talking about this in our operations meeting yesterday, this very thing, and it's timely. So exactly that. So when they go on to look for their ballot, there will be a description of that pickup process. So you'll see there's that delayed window for the pickup of those ballots in these X dates.
Okay.
So be very clear to the voter, not that they will read it every time, but it will be clear on the website.
That's.
Yep.
Just had a couple additional questions. One, with voters who are using the remote accessible vote by mail, making sure that they are being sent the envelope, the return envelope that is normally sent out in the vote by mail packet that has the holes that indicate where the signature line is, and also including that information in the EAP so voters are aware of it.
That's good advice. Yes, we're taking notes.
Okay, and then the second thing, you showed us the visuals of the Dropbox locations and or the drop boxes themselves, and also including for voters who are blind or low vision, including Braille on the drop boxes, so they're able to, if they would like to access it to drop off their vote by mail ballot, they can do that.
That is a good comment, and I'm going to be perfectly frank with you and tell you we haven't talked about that. Okay. So that's something we'll be talking internally about.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to raise it as a question.
Since there wasn't a line, I decided to come back. So, just two more clarification questions. They're not glaring, oh my gosh, this is all wrong questions, so I hope these are, the nitty-gritty pokey questions are desired. So, within the EAP, it establishes that each vote center will have a signature guide, as in like a singular signature guide. I was wondering, since we're reverting over to the equal book, there's not going to be somebody's not going to have to actually sign in pen on a piece of paper using the signature guide, somebody who's blind or low vision who can't see where to sign. So I was curious as to what's the purpose of the signature guide, if that's kind of in the materials.
Yeah, I'll have to flush that out a little bit further, I think, in the plan, but the device itself turns to the voter and they sign with their finger on the device. So I'll have to go back and read what you're talking about to connect the dots on that. Because what you're saying makes sense, and it doesn't make sense without.
Gabe and I were talking, and he said, "Oh, it's a signature guide for the equal book. That would be really cool, but it would be massive and not, the size of the credit card."
I don't think that's correct.
Yeah. So the other second clarification question was, in my understanding, there were two different phone lines that voters would have access to. One would be the toll-free voter phone line, and then the secondary one would be for voters who needed language assistance. They would be calling a phone bank. I just wanted to establish and make sure that those are, one is the one that we should be pushing out, saying if you have questions, if you have concerns, call this one. This is the secondary phone number that you will be directed to after you request language assistance.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for all your work. I have two questions as it relates to voting on college campuses. So you first mentioned social media information videos. Are there specific videos geared towards college students who are first-time voters and new to the area, and how to work with absentee ballots from students who don't live in this area?
So the videos that we're producing are a little bit broader. It relates to student voters, so it's kind of a broad category. It could be a high school student that is eligible to vote, or it could be a college student. So we're trying to capture all of that. It's a little tough, as you can imagine. We might be able to drill down a little bit further down the road, and we'll be able to refine them a bit. I don't know where you go to school if you graduate.
UCI.
UCI, okay. So I was going to use UCI as an example. We have a partnership with UCI to be able to push out information leading to the 2020 election. And we're going to be doing that on these social media videos and refining it as we go along as well.
Okay, fantastic. I have one other question, actually, as it relates to UCI. So there's many first-year students who live on campus housing. They don't have mailboxes, they have mail rooms. In the mail rooms, like I was a student last year where I checked my mailboxes every other month. Students, I don't get mail often. So students may not expect their mail-in ballots in March. They might check in June, it might be too late. Is there a plan to cooperate with the mail rooms to notify students or some other system with that?
I'm glad you're asking this question because we're desperately working with the administration at UCI to make sure that we can get this information out. One of the things I will say is that UCI, we partnered with them in the last couple of months to be able to get address updates, which we did not get before. So on the new dorms that are close to campus or the off-campus housing and the apartments, we're getting address updates for students, which never happened. So as we get close to the election, we're going to drill down the mailroom issue as well. And I will say this publicly, that UCI has been fantastic as a partner because they have increased the amount of information they're giving us as well as the back and forth.
Okay, fantastic. And I'll be in charge of voter registration at UCI, so I'll be working with all of y'all on that stuff.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, hello. I think you've done a wonderful job on this, and you and all your people, your team. I don't like speaking into mics. But I am concerned with so much about identity theft. How do I secure my vote if I'm not going to be asked my identification and then you can't verify my signature either?
I think it's a valid question, and these are bigger and broader questions for the legislature to address. Because currently, under the law, and the way that we're handling the operation of the vote centers, we're complying fully with California law and federal law. California law has an open system. And that open system essentially says that if you say that you are eligible to vote and that you meet all the criteria to register to vote and you sign that document, you're doing so under penalty of perjury, and then you're made active in the system. It's definitely above my pay grade to talk about the debate that's going on related to ID, because I don't think we're going to see that requirement in California anytime soon. So again, I would encourage you to contact your state legislator and talk to them about this issue, because that's where it needs to be.
Thank you.
Yep.
I hope I'm not out of line saying this. I was so disappointed at the first Board of Supervisors. We requested to be funded for this, and they voted no unanimously. I was so disappointed, and now we're back again. It's going to be September 10. Would all of you in the audience, if you are sold on this, please show up for the meeting, 9:30 in Santa Ana, or much easier, will you just email your supervisor? Each one of you can tell your supervisor and then urge everybody you know that this is a wonderful plan and it's going to be accepted September 10th.
Could they shoot you down?
What date was that?
September 10th.
So let me clarify, and thank you for the comments. The item that will be before the board on September the 10th is for the new equipment for vote centers. It's not for not going to vote centers or to change that option. It's simply for the equipment that will be used. Thank you.
But it's for the money.
The money's already been budgeted.
Oh, thank you.
Money's already been budgeted. This is just for the equipment.
Kind of going back to the identification conversation. There have been a lot of students pre-registered to the Young Mass Convent over the last summer months. And so can you just reiterate, I presume it's going to be the same process as was with neighborhood polling, how county employees will be instructed to direct voters who are appearing at a vote center for the first time, have never voted before, and what they're going to be instructed as regards their ID.
So under federal law, there is a requirement that if it's your first time casting a ballot in a federal election, you have to show some form of identification for that first ballot that you cast. That identification is listed in federal law, and it can include things like school information or utility bills. It doesn't have to be a photo identification. So the employees will be instructed to select one of those IDs if the voter presents it, and to be able to verify the information. If you're a first-time federal voter in an election and you're a vote-by-mail ballot voter, you get instructions included in that envelope on how to do that.
In the election in 18, there were quite a few Orange County voters that didn't receive their vote by mail. I understand there was a glitch or some problem. Has that been resolved now so that won't happen again, since everybody's going to be getting a vote by mail?
So let me clarify one thing on that. So on some of the DMV transactions that took place on automated voter registration, there was different data that was sent to us from DMV, and that changed some of the vote by mail status for some voters. That's the issue I think you're talking about. With respect to just voters saying on social media that I didn't get a ballot, et cetera, that's anecdotal. That's very difficult to even speak to, because when we're dealing with it on a daily basis and we're talking to voters on the phone, I can't tell you how many times, and it's in the hundreds and thousands, that voters request a second ballot and they call us back and say, I found it on the coffee table. What do I do with the first ballot? Because that's an ongoing struggle for us. And I'm hoping, by the way, that these ballots that are being sent out, because the envelope was changed, that it will help improve some of that. Okay. The third part, though, and I don't want to completely disregard your question because it's a good question. We continue to build on our partnership with the post office. I want to give the leadership some credit in Orange County and the post office, because on those issues where we have reports where people were not getting ballots in certain zip codes, the leadership jumped on that in the post office, and we tracked down those issues and find out what was happening. So a lot of things are happening related to that issue that you're describing. One of the things that's of value goes back to one of your first comments, and that is the information that's being put on the return envelope and the outside envelope. That was brand new for 2018. That allows us to track the return envelope just as much as we're tracking the outbound envelope. And we can look at that data from the post office and we can see the return and delivery rates from the post office. So again, a lot more data is being looked at on a daily basis, but good question.
With signature verifications, because of signing on the DMV little, pad, those are going to be really crazy looking. And you will be verifying every vote by mail and every provisional that's cast. How are you going to do that with that kind of issue?
It's a struggle, and that PIN pad is not a favorite tool of election officials because many times voters in DMV will use their fingers to sign that on that device, and some of them are older and they're not capturing that signature from the finger. Sometimes it looks like crayon, to be honest. So it's a challenge, and sometimes we're just getting lines, a curved line where we had a complete signature before. So that's evolving. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure down the road, years down the road, that signatures are the best way that we should be verifying voters. There might be other technologies that we can use to be able to do that. Yeah, so, no, I'm not, that's the, but the signature issue is an ongoing.
But you still have to verify every
Yes.
mail-in ballot and every provisional ballot.
Yes, ma'am. Every vote by mail ballot and every provisional ballot is looked at by a human set of eyes, not software.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. I was going to ask, since you're setting the parent that you're kind of a gold standard for the way voting should be done, maybe throughout the country, is there some way that you could start to maybe influence the legislature indicating best practices and maybe going like with fingerprints to unequivocally identify who these people are in the process of voting? I mean, so you would be like the spokesperson for really advocating some of these more advanced foolproof things, because signatures are obviously not good with those pads. And talking to the legislature about this and whoever else, because you seem to be like the leader and maybe can influence the people above us.
I appreciate your comments, but I will tell you the legislature does their own thing. We, as an association of election officials, and I will give the legislature credit on this, that we have a lot of engagement with them, back and forth when bills are being introduced and it's moving through the committee process, et cetera. So we are very much engaged in that and involved, and will continue to be.
We work with a different population. It's a student population, but there's the seniors. And I have to admit, I haven't seen your videos. So my question is, are they going to be closed captioned? Because I'll tell you, it is very disconcerting to sit in a classroom, we're watching a video, there's no closed caption, and you can't hear the next two sentences because one senior is saying to the other one, what did they say? So then you just lose everything. So will closed caption be on your videos?
So thank you for the question. Actually, it'll be open captions. So and thank you to our committee for helping us with that. So you will have all of that accessible, what you're describing in the videos themselves. And for language services, they will be dubbed.
Okay.
So yes, we are.
That's good. Thank you.
I just had a clarification. It was about the paper trail.
Sure.
Did you say there was a paper trail for everything? I wasn't sure how the process was working in there.
Yes, ma'am. So under the proposal for our new system itself, there will be a human readable paper ballot for every ballot cast, every single ballot. We have exhausted the questions. Well, let me say on behalf of our team, I want to thank you for coming out on a weeknight to hear this. I would encourage you, please go on the website, look at that draft plan, because there will be an amended plan posted based on comments from tonight. And there will be a new 14-day public comment period that you will be able to provide comments on that plan. So thank you again, and look forward to helping you vote in 2020.